The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you all so much for joining us here on CPA Academy. This is Jason Bookman speaking. I am not one of the two shining faces on your screen. Those are our presenters who you are going to hear a lot from over the next hour on today's webinar on diversity and inclusion one-on-one, the business imperative. And before we get into the webinar, I want to check that everything's working for all of you in the audience. So if you haven't done so already, please go over to the GoToWebinar questions area and let me know that you can see our presenters in the title card of the slides. Let me know that you can hear my voice, and feel free to let me know where you're listening in from, because we always like knowing where our audience is here on CPA Academy. And so far, I see a flurry of responses coming in. Thank you all so much for letting me know everything's working. And now that we know that you can hear, we can move into some housekeeping regarding polls and credit for today's webinar. This is a 1-hour webinar that qualifies for 1 CPE credit. And the way you earn that credit is straightforward. You need to do 2 things. You need to stay logged into the webinar for at least 50 minutes, 50 minutes out of the 60 minutes of our time, and answer at least 3 of the 4 poll questions that will be offered throughout the hour. When the polls come up, just hit the button corresponding with your answer and then hit the submit button in order to confirm your response. And we here at CPA Academy will issue your credit by the end of the day today. It will be available in your CPA Academy accounts within 24 hours. And now that we've gotten through all of the housekeeping up front, I don't want to take a second longer, so I'm going to turn things over to our presenters. So Jina, the floor is yours to get started, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. This is a new series that we are now hosting here on CPA Academy, and it's really focused on conversations around D&I. And rather than having a big presentation, I wanted to bring some thought leaders who could share a more intense or deeper conversation around a particular topic. And joining us today is Miss Kimberly Ellison-Taylor. I've known her for years. Hold on, I'm gonna take my glasses off. I'm gonna get my bio right here. So Kimberly, past chair of the AICPA, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Kimberly, but you are also the first chair of the Association of International, what's the term, the other one?
I am actually the second chair, but the first U.S. chair of the Association of International Professional Accountants.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And because I think people sometimes get confused about those two organizations. She's currently at Oracle, where she drives solutions and how they enable transformation around the world across industry. She was a chair at the Maryland's Association of CPAs, where I am a member. Actually, to be honest, Kimberly, what do we live, like 15 miles apart? Something like that. And she's a past president of her local chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho, which is a community service based organization. So Kimberly, you're out there in the community and you're involved, and in your role in particular, I think you were the youngest and the first Black chairman at the AICPA. So if anybody can speak to us about diversity and inclusion, it's you. So before we jump into the discussion, you want to talk a little bit about what this means to you, why this is important to you?
This entire area is so important to me. So I just want to thank the CPA Academy and you for inviting me to participate. That is so important. And thank you to everyone who is on today. I will tell you that Black History Month in particular makes it even more special that I am here and providing my thoughts. And let me just talk about why. Because there are a lot of different things that I know a lot of people are working on in the profession. And for instance, I'm the chair-elect for the AICPA's National Commission on Diversity and Inclusion. I know that there are affinity groups, like, for instance, I'm a lifetime member of the National Association of Black Accountants. Shout out to my Baltimore chapter. I also get to work with Alpha and Ascend, the organizations that work with Hispanic and Latinx colleagues, as well as those who work with colleagues in the Pan-Asian community. And it's really, really important to have an inclusive approach and to hear the voices that add so much to discussions about disruption, They add discussions to the discussions about operational excellence. But sometimes, Jina, quite frankly, those voices aren't heard or those voices aren't known. So it's really important for me as a leader to help elevate and magnify those voices so we multiply the number of people talking about how amazing the accounting and CPA profession is. And I think through that elevation, we would hopefully have more people who are interested in it as a career profession, and also certainly more students talking about it. So it's really important to me because as a little girl growing up in the inner city of Baltimore, someone did that for me. And I think aspiration enables inspiration. And I think it's something that for all of us who are really in the D&I space, this is going to be an area, I think, where representation matters. We're trying to get more voices out. Black History Month is a very visible area where everyone's talking about Black history. But the reality is it's every single day. It's not just in this month, but I'll take it. Let's celebrate what we can, and let's get more people aware of the amazing talent and contributions that have been made. And I'm just excited to be one of the very many people who are talking about this, and prayerfully have been very blessed to have some achievements that hopefully represent the possibility of what a future in accounting could be.
Thank you, and I can hear your passion, but of course I've worked with you more closely, so I know that, you know, when you speak, it comes from the heart, and I think that that's one of the things that I love about you, frankly. So in your remarks, you kind of brought me a couple different places, and if I can jump into, so two things, let me put one out there so I don't forget, and it's in your role, if you're the first Black chairman of the AICPA, has that been a spark for change? But before you answer that, you talked about Black History Month. And I've had some people ask, Black History Month, diversity and inclusion, this isn't all about Black, you know, about Black people, and because there's a lot of conversation in society today, post George Floyd, and rightly so. You know, these are conversations we need to have, but do you worry that there's an overemphasis, if you will, on race? And we're not looking at all the other groups that need to be heard and seen as part of the D&I conversation.
Excellent question. And I will tell you that when I peel back the onion on why we are still having these very strong conversations that we've had to get so much courage for to have, it's because we haven't really tackled the elephant, what was hard. I think there are definitely diversity segments that represent a full spectrum: gender, race, orientation, ethnicity, geography, whether or not you have an ability concern. There are so many different areas, and those were just a few. And yet we have noticed that there's a lot of conversation about Black people. And I get that. And if I were in one of the other groups, I'd have to say, well, what's happening? What's going on? But this is what I would say. I think color represents a hard area that we haven't fully addressed. And I think it's almost like a scab that we left it alone. We didn't touch it. We thought it would go away on its own. And now we've looked at the Band-Aid and we've realized that it's festering. That when we pulled the Band-Aid back a little bit, we pulled the scab off. And that, for me, is what happened last year with so many high-profile events. And it illuminated some of the things that we thought were either working themselves out, or because it didn't touch us in our day-to-day life, we didn't realize that people were experiencing, that there were two Americas that people were living in every day. And it does not diminish or discount the challenges faced by our colleagues and any of those other groups. But what I would say is, because I think that this area is one of the toughest ones, if not the toughest, that if we were able to address some of these issues, a rising tide really would lift all ships. And I would expect that the conversations that are being had around Black people would then start to illuminate and spotlight some of the challenges that our other colleagues are having as well. And so I think they go together. And so I don't want anyone to think that we are forgetting about the issues, rightly so, that are happening in other places as well.
You know, you said working themselves out. And it reminded me of the other question that I had asked, which is, you know, you were the chairman of the AICPA. I think there's now been, what, one other chairman after you and a new one coming in shortly. So, or maybe three, but in
three chairmen after me.
After you. So, you know, that tells us a lot, because that means it's only been in the last 5 years or so that the AICPA had its first Black chairman. And so you say we're working things out. Is your appointment to that role an indication of progress? And do you think it's going to be something that sparks a faster rate of change across the profession?
Well, and when I say working itself out, I want to be really clear. For instance, if you have kids, and I'll use a kid example, and I apologize for our colleagues who don't have kids, but you may have seen this. You know how sometimes on the playground you'll see where kids will sometimes push each other, and then you'll say, oh, I don't need to intervene, because in the next 5 minutes, they'll be playing together like nothing was ever wrong. And I can't tell you, at least with my sons, and I have 2 boys that are 22 months apart, 1 minute they were, you know, fussing, the next minute they were fast friends. And it worked itself out because they just figured out amongst themselves how to resolve it. So when I say work itself out, I think people thought, yes, this was a problem, but time heals all wounds, and that sooner or later it won't be an issue anymore. We don't have to worry about it. So it doesn't require active intervention. And if we just leave it alone, it'll work itself out. So that's what I mean when I say that. The great thing about what I experienced in working with AICPA as that's being the first chairman is that there was no overt, Kimberly, we want you to do this because you're Black. We want you to do this. We know we're making history. It was none of that. It was more about, Kimberly, we're talking about technology a lot. And you work for a technology organization. You're a CPA that back then what we were really saying would be a digital CPA. And you're out in front. You're talking about AI, machine learning, and cybersecurity, and some of these other emerging technologies. And we know that technology is a game changer. And skating to where the puck is going to be, and in looking around corners, we think technology is going to be an enabler of transformation. And you're in business and industry, you're in a perfect position to talk about these challenging issues. And as a matter of fact, we had, you know, some discussions on what it would be like to have a Black chairman and what people potentially would say. And I said, you know what? It's true that there will be people who will think that this could be political, but I'm confident in my credentials because, you know, at that point, I have a CPA, I have an MBA, I have a Master of Science in IT from Carnegie Mellon, I have a CIO certificate from Carnegie Mellon, I've worked at NASA, Motorola, KPMG, I've been a CIO, so I'm confident in my credentials. But they wanted me to be prepared in the event that this discussion did come up on someone's radar. And I will tell you, shockingly enough, it rarely did. When I was the chairman, it came up some, but it didn't come up as much as I thought it would because there was a great deal of focus on my platform issues, next generation leadership and technology, coupled with all the other things that when we talk about concerns in the profession, we're talking about business and industry, public accounting, government, education, not-for-profit, and consulting. And sole practitioner to organizations that have a couple 100,000 in multiple places or in one office all around the world across industry. So there's so much to talk about that D&I probably didn't get the attention that it needed. And while I think I was a catalyst to discussions and I was talking about my background and upbringing, I don't think it became a center point for many CEOs until the unfortunate events that happened last year. So hopefully by sharing my humble background, where I came from, how I got here, what I did. I helped change some of the discussion about where you find talent, because what I would say is you can find uncommon talent in uncommon places. And by using my own background and experience, I wanted to highlight, yes, it's true that we can have people move to the top of the organization when even if they grew up in the inner city of Baltimore. So a long way to answer your question. I am hopeful that me becoming a chair in 2016 is only an indication of the AICPA's desire to see leaders who have the skill set and who have the talent and the background needed, and they are inclusive in their approach. And I just happen to be the right person at the right time. And oh, by the way, she's female, and oh, by the way, she's Black, but not those two things leading those other very critical skill sets that I bring.
That's a really good point. And before we move on, Jason, do you think it's time to launch one of our polling questions?
I was just about to jump in. Yes, now's a great time. So I'm going to go ahead and launch poll question number 1. We're going to leave this open for long enough to get a majority of responses. So everyone go ahead and vote on poll number 1. We're going to leave this open for about a minute. So please get your responses in as quickly as you can by hitting the response corresponding with your answer and then hitting the submit button. And if anyone's having trouble answering the poll, go ahead and let me know in the questions panel. We're going to leave this open for about a minute.
Great. And while it's open, I just want to share something that you said, Kimberly, that I think is really meaningful, that you just happen to be a woman and that you just happen to be Black. And I think the beauty of your role, and actually the way I saw you in that role, is that none of that mattered. But the visibility of race was important for those of us to see somebody who looked like us in that space, important. But more important was for those of us to see somebody that looked like us in that space, but not being treated any differently, because there's no basis for being treated differently. Like you said, you had the credentials, you had the experience, you had the know-how, and that's how it should be. It's a great example of when we are inclusive and we pull the right people in for the right reasons, all of these other concerns like tokenism or favoritism, etc., they drop away.
That's exactly right. And I will tell you, it was interesting that we just did a, maybe several months ago, forum on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the discussion on imposter syndrome came up, because it always does come up, especially when you're talking to women, or if you're talking to minorities, it always comes up. And when I'm asked this question, I kind of cringe a little bit, because I've never felt that. And I've never felt that because I worked my rear off to get this certification, because I failed the exam the first time. I tell everybody that. And I'll tell you a funny story. When I've been talking to next generation leaders and I want them to know disappointments happen, but you got to keep getting up, keep trying. So I'm bearing my soul. And I tell them that I failed the exam in February. I passed it in November, the year I passed it. So when I'm leaving the room, we'll have colleagues in there to say, oh, Kimberly, I definitely resonate with you. I failed the exam actually twice. And all I can smile and laugh with them and say is, well, when I was saying that I failed the exam, where were you? You didn't stand up there with me to say how you failed the exam. Nobody ever wants to talk about it. But I wanted the students in this case to know that sometimes it just happens, because we have to put in the hard work. And when I determined that this was going to be what I really wanted to do, I studied every single day for like 6 months. And so no, I don't feel like I have the imposter syndrome, because if I understand that correctly, Jina, it's when you feel like you have something or got somewhere that you don't deserve. Now, I don't think that, because I work really hard. I practice. If I have a presentation, I practice. I'm in the mirror. I'm looking at my notes. I'm reading the book. I'm doing the homework. I'm doing the pre-exercises. I've gone to school quite a bit to get a couple of different degrees. And so to me, to say that I feel like I have something that I didn't deserve would be to diminish all of the hard work I put in to get to where I am. And even still, I'm a work in progress, but that doesn't mean that I think I have something that I shouldn't have.
It's interesting you say that, because as you're listing all of that hard work, what we know to be true is that this is true of all successful people. It's that hard work that you're talking about, it's important to do, but there's also a concern, and you know, at some point we probably should get to your 12-step program here, that your 12-step program, that sounds horrible, but the 12 steps for D&I strategy that you talked about.
I did the 12 steps based on the 12-step program.
Okay. But I just wanted to, if you could address, especially to those people who look like us that are watching us today, the concern that I know some people have, which is, yes, I have to work hard, and if I work hard, I can be successful, but do I have to work harder just to get to the same thing? And you know, we've heard it, you have to work harder than to be seen as equal to, is the phrase that I remember.
Oh, my mom said I'd have to work twice as hard to get half the credit. So that was actually the phrase. That's probably, yours is probably a little, not quite as mean, but my mom was preparing me, basically. What she was doing was helping me develop a Teflon and an expectation and understanding of what my life would be as a Black woman in a very humble socioeconomic context. And I do believe that there's this other phrase I grew up with as well, and that phrase is, it is what it is. And I can't change the world, but I can change my world. And then changing my world is a realistic understanding that until everyone is truly an inclusion ally, and until everyone understands why it matters to have an open, candid dialogue with people who are different than we are, there is definitely going to have to be, for those individuals, a little bit of extra work and understanding that there is a higher level of scrutiny. And I am 100% not saying that is fair, because I know my sons have fared me to no end in growing up when something isn't fair. I'm not saying it's fair, but I am saying that for where we are today, it's realistic. And then once you embrace that realism, you can then be a part of the change, even as you meet people where they are and understand that there are many biases that keep people from seeing us on the same exact level playing field as we need to be and should be. But until that day comes, the advice that I give my mentees and the advice that I give my sons is that be prepared to work hard, showcase your abilities, and I think that you will have mentors, coaches, and sponsors who are willing to step out and help you on your journey. But don't be afraid of the hard work, because it's definitely necessary.
So I've got some questions coming in. I'm going to hold them, but you just used the word ally. And so one question that I do want to ask now is, it wasn't specifically asked as allyship, but the way I'm interpreting it is, what can I do as a white person to help move the D&I, work forward? So that's a question about allyship, I think.
That's a great question about allyship, because people have had a genuine interest in asking, what do we need to do? I wrote an article for the Maryland Association of CPAs and also the Business Learning Institute that said, basically, first things first, before you're an ally, basically, you need to be a good person. And so I think we have to examine our biases. And there will be people who would deny it up and down. And so I've used things where I've evolved and grown, mistakes that I've made, the things I've said that later on I cringed because I realized that I didn't know what I should have been saying instead. And by making myself vulnerable, I'm hoping that they will understand that every single one of us is a work in progress and that we all have things we can learn. So even if you think you're a good person and that you would never do X, Y, and Z, chances are you are doing it, you are saying it, you grew up with it in your family, it's a part of your normal, you don't even know what's happening. And so part of being a good ally is examining those things that you could unknowingly do. So it does start with opening the door if you see someone coming with a lot of boxes. It does come along with, hey, telling one of your colleagues that their name came up in the conference call and giving them the notes so they can follow up. Or if you notice someone's not on the call, saying, oh, Janai texting me, Janai, and saying, Janai, there's a call and it looks like you should be here. And then you would say, oh my gosh, I completely forgot. Thank you so much for letting me know. All of those things are at the baseline of being a good ally. And then once you go from there, it's understanding, and that is one of my 12 steps. Basically, understanding the day in the life of the people that are around you. Sometimes we don't realize what other people's lives are like when they leave work. And once you get in touch with that, I think that's the course and setting the stage for being an ally.
Yeah, and so with that, thank you, Kimberly, the beautiful segue. I'm going to jump us back here to the article that you wrote. So this was last June. So it was right after the all of these incidences started happening, and there was a reckoning in this country. And you put out an article right away outlining steps that we can take. And the title is right here on the slide for everybody to see, a 12-step plan to address racism and unconscious bias. And I'm glad I asked you that question on the front end about people think this is just about race. Your strategy, the first bullet in here speaks specifically to Black and African American people, but your strategy isn't just for people of color, correct? And you want to start walking us through this a little bit?
Absolutely. And what's interesting too, Jina, because I got that question from people who are in different communities, I did go back and write another article. I think it was in the Journal of, not the Journal of Accountancy, in Accounting Today, that talks about why inclusion matters. And so I would definitely encourage them to take a look, because I was talking about inclusion councils and broadening the strategy so it doesn't just include Black or African Americans, but it's more of an inclusion strategy. But in this particular case, I was responding to the grief. I mean, I was in pain. I mean, I hope I don't cry now, and it's been several months later. I just couldn't believe that what happened and what I know could happen happened on a video that we could see. And it was deeply hurtful to me. It was hurtful because I've been married to my college sweetheart for 23 years. I have 2 sons, and all I could think was, where have we come in today's environment that this could happen, and that it could be videotaped and people could be watching it. And so when I wrote that, it was trying to help my very dear Caucasian colleagues who I love. I mean, I have so many deep relationships where I have called so many people my sister, my brother, because except for our skin color, we would be almost exactly alike. I mean, same things that draw people to being a CPA are probably more prominent than skin color. Because if you didn't know that someone was white and I'm Black, you would think we were 2 peas in a pod. And I have enjoyed those relationships with people, Indian, Asian, Hispanic, Canadian, geography, wherever they were, all around the world. And so when I wrote this, it was in response to my colleagues, both in minority and non-minority groups, saying, what can we do? And so I just really wanted to have, because we like checklists, we got to own it, we do.
Yep, we do.
I wanted to provide a checklist. And so that's why I said, just to walk through it a little bit, and I'll just walk through this page, was we got to start with acknowledging the challenges faced by Black and African Americans. Now remember, when I said a rising tide lifts all ships, the reason, and one of the reasons, not there are many reasons, but one of the reasons I know that color is an issue is because we still have gender issues, no question, but we've made so much progress. Oh my gosh. We see firms having more female partners. We see female managing partners who are in charge, CEOs. We see in the business and industry community, we see females who are the CFOs or their budget directors or chief accounting officers. We see more deans. We see more people who are state society executives. So much progress. But I will tell you, it's for Caucasian women. People of color and women are not coming together. So gender and race are not coming together at that same progress point.
Right.
So
Actually,
that tells me what?
I just
What
want
does
to
that
jump
tell
in
you?
on that point real quick, because the statistics that we do have for the CPA profession that look at ethnicity, when you look at those, I don't know, slices of the pie charts, and those pie charts reference the Black community, that is predominantly male. And I think it's important, it's a really important point that you just brought up, because when you said rising tides, did you say rising tides lifts all ships? What I hear you saying is that we have to lift everyone up.
Yes.
And so that includes women of color, not just women.
Yes. Because what happened was, I would say when we first started looking at diversity, women were easier. But the easier low-hanging fruit, and I get it because that's what we say at work. When you want to show a win, you want to show success, you go to the low-hanging fruit. Our Caucasian female colleagues were the low-hanging fruit where we could see more progress. But the reason that race is a factor is because if it was gender alone, then all women would have progressed. And all women have not progressed. So then that leaves me with color. So then color is the outlier that makes a difference. And that's what we are not seeing progress in, not at the same pace. So why is that? So we have to ask ourselves these tough, uncomfortable, you'd rather be at the dentist getting a root canal questions, because that's how we're going to see progress. And that means understanding. And I have gotten into, deep discussions on words that are trigger words. I don't want to trigger anyone. So I'm not I don't want to go down semantics. And I've said this to colleagues. You can call it privilege. You can call it advantage. You can call it your leadership. Whatever word makes you feel like it's not making you on the defensive. But at the end of the day, my outcome that I want us to understand is that on the basis of birth, and on the basis of socioeconomic class, and on the basis of how you were born, and if you were born normal, and I put air quotes around whatever that is, you have a walk through life where people are not looking at you twice. You're in the majority. And when you're in the majority of whatever segment, you have an advantage. And so we just need to realize that. But sometimes the very definition of privilege or advantage or whatever word you want to insert, because it doesn't matter to me, is thinking that there's no problem because you don't have the problem.
Right. And so that's why, looking at your first, when I'm actually looking at what we see on the slide, your first one is acknowledging those challenges, but then your second one is what you're just talking about, which is listen and understand. And it sounds to me like it's don't presume to know. I've seen a lot of articles saying it's not the role of the minority to educate the majority. And so it sounds like the majority then, in this case, we're speaking specifically about white with respect to the Black community in the industry, is that listen to them so that you can understand their experiences as a step of their own learning, right?
Yes, but then here's where I'm a little bit different, maybe. I'm a bridge builder. So I'm about meeting in the middle. I'm going to build a bridge, a connection. I want us to meet in the middle. So what I've challenged our colleagues to do is to say, no, you shouldn't feel like you're the person that gets up every day. You're not Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You're not Rosa Parks. I get it. You shouldn't have to carry the mantle of describing what it's like to be in any group, race, religion, orientation, ethnicity, physical ability, whatever it is. You should not have to feel that way. But here it is. I'm back to my phrase. It is what it is. If it is only you, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? Do you accept the mission of understanding that you can be a game changer. You can change the lives of colleagues that come to work for that firm, that come to work for that organization, because you provided 10 minutes, and even if you had to do it every single day, 10 minutes of education and awareness about what it feels like to be you, to explain something that happened on TV. Now, I'm not saying it should be expected of us, but what I have asked and challenged us to do is to step into that role and embrace it and understand that to whom much is given, much is required. And that means stepping into being an ambassador of change, and maybe you're an ambassador of education, and through you, through your eyes, through that connection, you could help that person and totally change their whole destiny and trajectory of how they interface with minorities. And so I know that the popular opinion is, oh, we shouldn't do it, we shouldn't expect it. I agree with the not expecting it, but my challenge to us is to step up into those roles.
And I think what you're saying is, part of the way I'm hearing that is, there's a lot of conversation about having uncomfortable conversations or difficult conversations. And if we want the colleagues who don't look like us to engage in those conversations, well, if they're talking with us, we have to also be ready to have those uncomfortable conversations. Those are not one-way dialogues, it's a two-way conversation. So before we jump into that, I want to make sure I don't exclude the questions that are coming in, and I also want to make sure that we hit all of those polling questions. So Jason, you want to do another one here?
No problem, Jina, thank you so much. Poll 2 is live. We're going to have 2 more polls after this one. So everyone, please get your answers into poll question number 2. We're going to close this down when it's appropriate to do so. And again, this is poll 2. If you're having trouble answering, let me know in the questions panel.
So I'm looking at the questions and I'm trying to see if there's a question that relates to some of the points that we have up, the first 6 points. So there is one question, and I'm going to have to jump over number 3 to get to number 4. We had a town hall, but everyone was afraid to speak up. I think that's the one here. Yeah. So are there any suggestions on how to respond to that? That's jumping a little deep here, but that's related, I think.
Well, and I can definitely relate to that, because what we also hear in the Two America system that we've been operating under, don't whine, don't be the squeaky wheel. You know, you want to fall under the radar. You don't want to be the person bringing up issues. It's certainly not in a public forum. So to the degree that town halls can have those questions come in an anonymous kind of way, it might give more courage to people. And if you have people, if you have a DNI council and you have some of the leaders being willing to be vulnerable, it's because people don't think that everyone else has the same challenges they have, or they don't think everyone else has the same questions that they have. So I would say either start out with some feeder questions, provide some way for them to be anonymous, or ask a few of the leaders across the various different groups to please share some of their experiences. And that gives people, I think, courage to speak up.
So maybe this isn't on point, but it's related to something you just said. So this question asks, how big does a company need to be before you actually hire someone focused on D&I? And what made me think of that question as it relates to your comment is you said something about D&I advisory panels and groups. And so I think not all organizations have those. So how big do you have to be to have one?
I would say as soon as you have probably 2 people, you need to be thinking about it, especially if they don't relate, they're not related to you. But you also have your clients. So even if you were a sole practitioner, but you were starting to think about clients, or you're working in an office and you're in business and industry, and all of your business partners that you would work with would potentially could be something different. And I say that potentially, but let's face it, there are plenty of diverse characteristics that are invisible, like the iceberg, that you have no idea about. And even what I say to my colleagues today, we have no idea how many colleagues have kids who might be of the LGBTQIA community, or who could be married to a Black person or Asian person, Hispanic person, someone's loved one could be in a wheelchair or have some form of intellectual disability. You have
We
to be
know that-
careful.
I would add to that, we know that 70% of all disabilities are invisible. So for all you know, your colleague actually has one.
Yes.
So, sorry, I
you
just want to
know
add that to the pile.
And great point. We have many colleagues who have multiple races. Thanks to those Ancestry.me and 23andMe and all of those DNA charts, people have now realized that they had a lot more mixed ancestry than they knew, and people in their families. And I will tell you, that is definitely interesting as well, because I've had colleagues who maybe look white, but they really, really have heritage from being Hispanic. And so you just don't know where people are from. They have family members in Mexico. They grew up in Mexico for the first 7 years. They came to the US. They don't have an accent, so you think you can say it. You can't say it because you don't know where people are from.
That's
and so
true.
I have challenged my colleagues that it's difficult to live two lives. You can't live one way in your mind and think that it will not express itself in what you say, and it shows up in microaggressions in what you do. So the best way is to pull all that together and just work on peeling back some of those things that are creating divisions and might make you someone who has blind spots and just don't know it.
Right, right. All right, so I'm doing a quick time check. I want to make sure we can cover all of these things. We probably have about 20 minutes left. So I'm trying to think here. How about number 5, establish appropriate funding? I know in my work, I hear this, we want to do something, but we don't necessarily have the budget for it. So what do you mean by establishing funding?
That ties back to your last question. So let me be clear and wrap that up, and then I'll tie it into this one. You may be, depending on what size you are, you may not have the ability to bring in someone full-time, but you can bring in someone who complements your HR team or complements your office. Bring in a DDI consultant, someone that can assist you, and it's kind of ad hoc. You can bring them in periodically, a couple of hours a month, and it's probably a lot less expensive than hiring someone full-time. And until you can get someone on full-time, that would be a great strategy. That lends itself into this one about appropriate funding. If you say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to you, having the best and the brightest and having high-performing talent with an inclusive leadership mindset are things that are top of mind for you, and then your D&I budget was cut by 50%, it is not showing alignment between what you say and what you do. Love is as love does. Now, we are in a COVID environment where revenues are definitely not what they should be, so we all have to understand and be flexible and understand that we've got to make some tough choices and priorities, because certainly we'd rather have people working than to have this D&I budget be the same as it was last year. Let's put our priorities in order. But coming out of this environment, and fingers crossed and prayers that we will be back where we were, and we're working on being stronger than we were, then that means that we need to put some effort and funding consistent with the outcomes that we expect.
So you just said something about funding as it relates to outside consultants. And the other one I want to throw out there is you can bring in partners, help with your learning and development team as well.
Yes.
So that you can provide training so you can provide different types of training. But another thing that popped into my head about funding is we need to close the pay gap. And for a lot of things we're talking about, you said we've made a lot of strides with gender. We still know that there's a pay discrepancy, not so much actually in public accounting, but maybe in broader business. And so there's some equity work we can do with respect to the funding. And so I just wanted to add that in there.
100. Even where you go and recruit, where you go and hire. I mean, interviewing panels, the funding of making sure that you have your recruiting team go to different schools is a part of the funding. And I absolutely agree with you 100%.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you start breaking it down like that, Kimberly, I think some companies and some firms can step back and say, we're already spending money in these places, but we haven't called it out as specific funding to support diversity. And maybe if they look at those dollars and aggregate them, they can realize 10% more and we can start to drive some things differently. And it's not a matter of scratching up new dollars. It's a matter of looking at the dollars you're currently spending and getting really clear on the value that they can bring back.
Absolutely.
So I'm trying to decide. I'm going to move on to the next one because we can always circle back, because I've had that up. Now I want everybody to be able to see the other ones. One of them here is the journey map. And so there's a question that came in, and I think it's because they already could see the slides. There's a question that came in that said, what is a journey map? And so I thought this is one of those situations, let's not assume everybody knows all the vernacular. It's a good opportunity to clarify some of the language around diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. So remember when I keep, and I think I said it a couple times, the day in the life. And the day in the life means what my day looks like, what my experiences look like, and then outline what someone else's experience is and what their day looks like. So in this case, when I say journey map it, I mean basically illustrating it like you would a storyboard. And so let's start with, okay, I came to work on the same day as Jina. We're there. We got our placements. Okay, so we're kind of going down the same path. But then
career-wise, not from a day perspective.
No, now I'm on my career. And that's why I said employee. Because if you and I were in the firm 7 years, or in a business and industry organization, so let me use an example over there. If I'm a senior accounting analyst and you are my manager 2 levels up.
But we started at the same time.
Right, we started at the same time with the same relative background. Why and what happened? And then I'll start to notice, okay, so let's look at Kimberly's feedback, because I think feedback is a gift. So, wow, looks like Kimberly had a mentor that was assigned to her, but she and her mentor really didn't get together as much as Jina, you and your mentor did. And this is presuming if we were 2 different, races. So your mentor actually went on to be a partner.
Or my champion, my sponsor, right?
Yeah, and then so they were your mentor, then they were coaching you because they were moving up. And then they became a partner and could be a sponsor, or they became the CFO or the budget director. And then they became a sponsor and kind of gave you the course correction, the feedback, the initiative, the challenging assignments. They work to help you. Kimberly on this hand didn't have that. As a matter of fact, the person that was assigned to me left. So then I had to get someone else, and they probably weren't as hard a charger as the person that you received. And then when I start looking at the comments and evaluations that I've gotten meets. Jina, you were getting outstandings every year. So you were moving up, you were getting more confidence, you were going to conferences. I look over here to see Kimberly's challenge assignments, see what she's been working on, see what she's been doing. Oh, she's been assigned to a client that we no longer even have. Right. Jina's client has produced $3 million. Now, that's not to say that some of that isn't on each one of us, but some of that at that early point is on the ecosystem, the resources, and the equity we are provided in order to succeed. Right. And so people succeed, I think, based on the resources that they are provided, which is why in today's environment, we're talking about equity in school systems, equity in a COVID environment. We're talking about who has access to technology so that they can do the virtual learning, so that they can get online. So there's a difference between our journeys, and then there's no surprise that you're going to end up on a different management rung than I am. And it might take you 10 years and it might take me 15 to get to the same point. But really it's not, because your income would have been increasing the whole time and I'm 5 years behind you and not getting those salary increases. So it's like a domino effect of what you can see. But when you're looking at the journey, you want to see if there were biases or things from a onboarding and orientation that we could have done.
Thank you. I think I'm seeing a nudge here. We need to do the third poll because we got to get all the questions in. People want their CPE. So Jason, you want to go ahead and launch that poll, and then once that starts, I can throw another question at Kimberly.
That sounds good. Thank you, Jina. We've got one more poll after this one. So this is poll 3 that is currently up. We're going to close it down when it's appropriate to do so. Again, if you're having trouble answering, let me know in the questions panel. If you have questions, go ahead and put those in the questions panel, and we'll have one more poll through our remaining time.
So there's a question here. Let me look at your steps. So you have step number 8, determine ways to promote individual and collective accountability for the inclusion culture and the organization's core values. And there's a question here, maybe it doesn't match up exactly. So I'll give you both of them, and then maybe you can tie them together. One is, how do I give feedback to somebody when the stuff feels sensitive? And I think that speaks to the inclusion culture. And then the other one says, what can I do as someone in middle management to help the leadership understand the perceptions of the rest of the team? Does that make sense? So the middle manager is sort of in between?
Absolutely. And I would dare say that when you look at Glassdoor, or when I've spoken to colleagues on LinkedIn, when I get the notices that they've left one place and they're going to another, and then I know the story that they put out, and then usually I'll email them and say, so what really happened? Because I know that you would have stayed there, I thought, for at least another 3 to 5 years, but now you're leaving. What happened? And in most cases, it's the middle manager. And I know that the people at the top of the organization are saying all the right stuff. But my personal belief is that this type of training needs to be a little more intentional, meaning that everyone across the whole organization should be getting it. They shouldn't be able to opt out of it. We're not opting out of insider trading or money laundering or the technical, trainings that we need to have. We shouldn't be able to opt out of this inclusion type training and understanding what microaggressions means. And I don't think we should be able to opt out of having candid, courageous conversations and providing feedback with middle managers in particular, practicing that skill set and being coached on exactly how to do it. Because in the example that I gave before, I believe that a different leadership team, and in particular, probably middle managers, could have made a difference in helping Kimberly along her career track the same way that Jina had the assistance to help her. That difference were their middle managers. So middle managers absolutely need that training. I know there are thousands of other trainings that they're on, point to get, but this one is important as well. It's important to how you interface with clients. It's important to retention. It's important to how you're going to prepare for new engagements, because you got to have people on deck that can do the work. So this is not a soft, squishy area. This is a strategic business imperative, and we need everyone to understand how important inclusion is to the bottom line and also to the business growth, or also to firm growth. And so middle managers, I think, are particularly key to that discussion point.
So I want to make sure you have time. I've been picking some of these out. Is there one of these, and I can go back to the previous slide, is there one of these that you want to call out and talk about more? Oh, and before you answer, Jason, just let us know when we need to do the last poll in case we're not tracking on the time here. So Kimberly, is there one you want to talk about?
The one that you picked out, I think, was spot on. Determining ways to promote individual and collective accountability. Listen, I'd love to see it in some point in everyone's performance appraisals. And I wouldn't phrase it the way that I phrased it there. I think I would have a question that says, what did you do to promote and enhance the business's culture or core values? And maybe have them talk about mission, purpose, and values and how they're aligned, and what things did they do. And in particular, you're looking for things where they were a great ally, things that they did to invite people to coffee, to talk to people they didn't know, to really understand other people's perspectives. Because if you're going to put out culture and core values, where is the evidence? And I'm saying that a lot more. It's one thing to say beautiful, fancy words, and I've seen the most beautiful statements, and I've seen activities, but activities and results are two different things. The core, I think, outcome measure is on your retention, and I think it's also on the representation that you have at every level of the organization. It doesn't always flow one-to-one, but if I see an organization that has all their top leaders, all of their people sitting at the top table are all of one demographic, and you see people at the different levels not necessarily flowing up to the top, it's gonna give me a, I wonder why that is. And so there's definitely some work. And I'm not saying, let me be crystal clear, I am not saying put artificial targets or put people in place where they are not qualified. I'm not saying that at all. We can have the best and the brightest, and we can have a high-performing, inclusive team where everyone works together and that we live the core values every single day, and every person feels connected and a sense of belonging, and they feel trust, and that the leaders really care about them. And when you have that trust, I think in turn it reflects back to how we treat our clients and how we treat our customers.
And I know we don't have a lot of time. I want to just tie everybody back to, we didn't get to this. Step number 3 is review the data. And something that you were just talking about, you can't do that analysis if you haven't pulled out your data. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about data, you mean run the numbers, look at the demographics, look at the history. It ties into the journey mapping that you were talking about. So I just wanted to connect that. And then I want to throw a different question out at you, because this gets back to vernacular. On number 7, you write, encourage allies to join the affinity groups and create groups based on hobbies and interests. So the question is an affinity group an employee resource group? And what's the difference between the two? Well, that's what it asked. What's the difference between the two?
So I think they are one and the same. The affinity groups are your circles of belonging, the community that you identify with that makes you feel this enhanced sense of trust and belonging. And so there will be groups for women, there are groups of Black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, Indigenous people, and there could be groups for LGBTQIA community members and people who may have different abilities, veterans, so on and so on. And because the intersection is sliced a little bit differently across the groups, you will definitely see people in multiple of the groups. Mm-hmm. But I also think that we need the horizontal as well, not just the vertical. And so when I say new groups, I'm thinking, let's figure out a way that we can cross-mingle. Because yes, I understand diversity, which means representation and circles of belonging associated with me being Black, but I also like to read. I would love to be in a community, a book club of people who like to read, and that is not based on my color, race, ethnicity, gender, or whether I'm a first-time English speaker or not. It's just purely based on what I like to do. And I think we need to strike both ways, because we'll get the dog lovers, the cat lovers, people who like to ski, walk, hike, and then we will have each one of us learning more about each other, and I think becoming a tighter knit group and becoming colleagues who really do trust each other.
So Jina, I'm going to take that pause for that last poll, and while you do that, I'm going to move the slides forward because I wanted to make sure there's a moment for people to see all of this stuff. There are a lot of resources, and yes, I know we have people that are joining us today who aren't necessarily in the public accounting profession, but many of these resources are publicly available, and they're really to promote and support your organization, regardless of the size, regardless of the type, to help move some of these things forward. And so with that in mind, Kimberly, I want to throw out one more question that might be the last question we get to. You've been talking a lot about these steps of strategy, and the question is, isn't this something, I'm going to take that to mean, isn't all of this something that our leadership should be doing and not us?
It takes all of us. Our leadership cannot do it alone, and that's why one of the steps talks about individual accountability and putting it in performance plans, because it needs to go all the way down to the entry-level person. It's the receptionist, it's the person who greets you in the cafeteria, it's the door person, it's every person, it's HR, it's the chief diversity officer team, it's the CEO leadership team, it's all the people managers. I think where we go off a little track is giving the responsibility and separating that from the authority and the accountability to make it happen. We are all accountable, we should be. And we all should have the responsibility. Now, we may not all have the authority, but we all should feel some accountability to do our part, and also willing to put in that work. And I don't see that happening. And because we're mixing up authority, accountability, and responsibility, I think you have three people whose jobs it is to make it happen. No one else maybe has it in their day-to-day. They're focused on other things that are valuable, but they're not focused on this. And so inconsistent strategies lead to inconsistent results. And that's exactly why we have this same issue happening over and over again. And it's also why when that amazing leader who's at the top of the organization is no longer there, we're back to the drawing board with the same issues happening. If we want this to be a place where we no longer even need to have diversity, equity, and inclusion separate from the talent organization, it needs to be a live part of the organization, not a special initiative. It's an ongoing programmatic initiative that lives every single day, not a standalone ad hoc thing that we do for Black History Month or Pride Month or Women's History Month. It needs to be every month and every day.
So we're very quickly running out of time. I do want you, if you could, to touch on number 12, move inclusive leadership to the main stage.
Absolutely. Representation matters. Aspiration enables inspiration. When you see there's someone that looks like you are inspired, you know that it can happen. You now don't think of this as something that's so lofty, you should just leave because it will never happen. It's never in the cards for you. You can believe that with hard work and perseverance and dedication, that the American dream that we talk about, that you can take part in the American dream. And because you see someone that looks like you, it becomes a little more real for you.
Thank you. That's so true. And so we're here pretty much at the end of our time. Thank you, Kimberly. I could listen to you talk all day, and you know we've talked about this before, but I think it was important for people to hear your voice, especially as we wrap up, Black History Month, because this is an important month and it's meaningful. And so before we go, I do want to invite everyone to join us for our next session. I'm going to be talking with Michael Lee. He's the CEO of Reconciled. And it's interesting because we've been talking a lot in this session about bigger companies. Michael has what qualifies as a small business, but it has a national footprint. And so small businesses, we need to think a little bit differently, or do we, about D&I? So I'm going to have an opportunity to talk with Michael about that. So I think that's it. Jason, we're going to turn it back over to you to do whatever that admin stuff is that you have to do at the end.
Jina, Kimberly, thank you both so much. And I'll get the admin stuff out of the way as quickly as possible. Thank you both so much for a fantastic conversation. And of course, thanks to everyone in the audience for your participation and attendance. CPE will be issued by the end of the day today. That will be available in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close out. So thank you all for your time and attendance. Jina, Kimberly, thank you both so much for an insightful conversation. We hope to see you all on future webinars and hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.